Okay, let's get started. Hello, everybody. We're delighted that you're here. We're privileged that we can present the findings of our Trends in Global Virtual Teams survey. We're real happy that everybody's here. I think everybody's logged in, or lots of folks have logged in by now, so we can get started. So just a little bit of background as to how we're going to be handling our session today. We were concerned that reporting on the findings and numbers would be risk of being a little boring. So during the time that we're going to be reporting on the findings of the survey, we're having the three colleagues here, Charlene Solomon, the president, and Sean DeBerk, the director of training, joining me in making this presentation and having a little discussion with you all on the findings and what they mean and what some tactics might be to maximize effectiveness of global virtual teams. So it's a bit of a dialogue as well as a report. And we encourage you to participate and send in questions. We have a CTO, Joshua Sturtevant, producing the program, and he'll be fielding your questions, and at the end of the session, we'll be reviewing as many of those as we can. So with that, you know who we are, so let's get started. A little bit of background about today's session, some housekeeping items.
Thanks, Mike. This is Sean DeBerk again here. I'd like to just briefly familiarize you all with the GoToWebinar platform that we're using today. We have a large number of callers, so your phones have been muted to reduce background noise. And there will be a poll later on in the session, so I just want to alert you to that. Please respond as soon as we launch the poll. And we will also leave a few minutes at the end for questions and answers. And you can submit any questions throughout the session today using the questions area of the GoToWebinar platform. It should be somewhere on your desktop. Usually it kind of exists on the right-hand side of your screen. Explore that platform so you can really understand exactly how you can participate with us today. I do want to make sure everyone knows and everyone is very clear that we will be making the Virtual Team Survey report available to you in PDF. It's about 50 pages long. In addition to a recording of this presentation, all via email towards the beginning of next week. So please look out for that email. And with that, I'll give it back to Mike to take a look at the agenda.
Great. So we actually have 4 items on the agenda today, not the 3 that we're seeing here, but these are the 3 primary ones. We're going to go through in today's review the respondent demographics. We're going to discuss the key findings. We're going to talk about some of the implications and best practices that we find that will be responsive. And throughout all of these aspects of the program, Charlene, Sean, and I will be adding some comments and adding, before we get to item 4 on the agenda, the invisible item 4, which is answering your questions. Before we begin, I think it's really important for us to take note of some things that are pretty obvious. And it's also kind of the reason why we do this survey, in addition to wanting to know what the trends are and what the challenges are in global virtual teams. We actually do this because, as you all know, global work is virtual work. I mean, that's just an obvious statement, but that is the absolute truth, and we don't think about it often enough. The other thing that we know is that working virtually magnifies cultural differences. Whatever differences exist, when you take away the opportunity for body language, for seeing the person you're talking with, for reading gestures, you significantly enhance the other aspects of communication and teamwork, and that's where you have an opportunity for even more cultural barriers to spring up that you might not even be aware of. And because virtual teams are so ubiquitous in an organization, because they're so easy to establish, because we've got technology platforms that enable us to work virtually and collaborate virtually, we tend to think that virtual work is easy because setting it up is easy to do. And it's anything but easy. It's where you'll see that all the cultural challenges that exist are put on steroids in these sessions. And because of the simplicity and because of the ubiquitousness, we forget how much effort has to go into being effective on a virtual team. A little bit of background now with that in mind. This is the third survey that we've conducted. The first one was in 2010. And we've been doing them every 2 years. We now have participants, about 3,000 participants from over 100 countries, and there are almost 3,000 completed surveys that are part of this report. So with that, the way we're going to proceed today is that Sean will go through the data. Charlene and I will add comments as we go along to his, and we'll try to make this as exciting and interesting a report as possible.
Thanks, Mike. So we wanted to start off by sharing some of the key demographic insights that we gained from this survey. And to start, let's take a look at the kind of nationality, the profile of these respondents. There were a total of 2,984 survey respondents this year that were based in 101 countries. And in the left-hand column of this table, we've identified the percentage of survey respondents based on nationality. So while most of the respondents were from the U.S., many were from Europe and Asia, and we've got a lot of countries all over the world that are represented in this data, but only a smattering of individuals from those locations. So you can see here kind of the spread, nationality-wise, of folks who responded, quite a global response. The largest group in terms of age, at 49% of all respondents, were from 35 to 50 years old. And generally, this represents what we know in the West as Generation X. Now, this cohort is followed by individuals aged 34 and under. 27% were generally within this cohort, otherwise known as Generation Y or Millennials. And the smallest group at 24% were more than 50 years old and representative of the baby boomer generation. This is a new question that we asked this year to start looking at generational differences.
So folks, when we went through this data, what we found was that the respondents' age groups didn't conform to the age groups of the general workforce. There were more people in the 35 to 50 range in our survey than in the general workforce, and we can't quite get an understanding of what that is, except to think that maybe the people who are in white-collar global jobs would be more in the 35 to 50 range. And we'll continue to look at that number, but it's interesting to note this age spread is not typical of the global workforce.
We also asked respondents to identify their gender, and this year we asked this for the first time. 52% of respondents were male, and 48% were female. And it seems that we've got a connectivity issue here, so I just want to confirm with our producer, Joshua Sturdivant, that we see this the change in slides here. I just want to confirm that everything's moving along as needed.
We're still in the age and gender slide, Sean.
Okay. Bear with us while we troubleshoot. Josh, can you tell us what you're seeing now?
Yeah, it still shows age and gender, Sean.
All right, I'm going to change presenters for a second here, and let's see what happens.
Yes.
Okay, that's changed now, Sean.
All right, so now we're going to use my computer as backup. Sorry about that, folks.
All right, go ahead and start showing again, Sean. It stopped playing for a moment.
Okay.
There you go. It says organization size now.
Okay, great. So this is where we intended to go next after the gender slide. So we're going to be looking right now at the organization size. And what we found is that the majority here, 43% of respondents, told us that they were members of an organization that had over 50,000 employees. And the next largest group was actually the 22% here that you see, members of organizations that were less than 5,000 employees. We wanted to make sure we understood the size of organizations in relation to the level of virtual work that folks responded to. Now, looking at industry, the largest group came from the finance, insurance, legal, and accounting sector, followed by information technology at 14%, and also matched at 14% were folks from industries that covered manufacturing, aerospace, and transportation. So we wanted to know how many virtual teams folks were on, and we found that over or nearly a third were only on a single virtual team, but more interestingly, a quarter of all respondents were on at least 4 teams, if not more. This was really interesting because the concept of a virtual team, I think, ranges from partnering with 1 or 2 individuals via phone or email, or having something more profound globally with numbers of people across a number of geographies.
We were really surprised that a full quarter of the respondents were on at least 4 teams. It was, you start thinking about the amount of effort and the amount of hours that go into global virtual teamwork, and it starts to really be profound.
And it reinforces the notion that global work is virtual work.
These are also new questions. We wanted to know how much time individuals spent working on virtual teams, and we found that around 40% of people worked between 15 to 20 plus hours per week on virtual teams. And interestingly, people worked anywhere from 40% to 100% of their time working virtually. In the pie chart on the right, you can see that across the green, white, and purple triangles, you have 40% of participants that are working anywhere from around half of their time to all of their time on virtual teams. So the growing importance and ubiquity of virtual teams is something that we've noticed in our 3rd biennial survey.
Yeah, and again, that's the same kind of reinforcement of how critical virtual teams are, not only because that's where we get so much of our global work done, but it's where we spend so much of our time. You think about the extent of energy and effort that we spend working virtually.
We wanted to better understand how people felt their virtual work informed their productivity. And what we found is that 41% of respondents relied over 50% on their virtual work for their productivity. So we really are talking quite a bit about how virtual work is very much global work, and global work is inherently diverse on a cultural level. So we wanted to understand the levels of cultural diversity that individuals were experiencing on their virtual teams. And while everyone that responded to our survey said that they had worked on a virtual team, at least 77% and probably more of respondents had colleagues from other cultures on their teams. And actually 41% said that over half of their teams included people from other cultures. The interesting note there at the bottom is that in the challenges section of our survey, 65% of respondents found they encountered challenges that had to do with cultural differences on their virtual teams. And we'll explore more specifically what those cultural challenges were through some of the dimensions of culture that we use at RW3.
And when we say that at least 77%, the number is probably more than that because the way the numbers turned out, but it's likely that more than 77% of the respondents had colleagues from different cultures.
Great. So why don't we go ahead and move into our second module here, which is on key findings. We wanted to make a statement around the impact virtual teaming has on productivity. And through a kind of manual compilation of various responses, we estimate that around 80% of respondents have stated that virtual teams have the potential, or they've experienced, this higher quality output. This is one of the great reasons why virtual teams exist. And we can see here in this bell curve that virtual teams, as cross-cultural teams, as global teams, are either the best teams or the worst teams. They're either highly effective or highly ineffective. And we wanted to show you this bell curve. This is research coming from Dr. Carol Kovacs, but there are a number of studies that show this. The effectiveness of diverse teams can range from extremely ineffective to very effective. But the challenge is around leveraging that diversity. So we then wanted to share that 92%, almost everyone, indicated that productivity was negatively impacted by the inability for folks to read the nonverbal cues. The lack of visual stimuli severely impaired virtual teams to be productive. And beyond that, the typical challenges that we've seen in previous years around building relationships in a virtual environment, in addition to time zones, language, and accents, continue to remain barriers to effectiveness.
And as far as time zones, language, and accents go, although we can't change that, well, later on you'll see we offer some what we consider best practices, or at least ideas to start dealing with some of those difficulties. Not only, we all know you can change the meeting time so that different people experience not only the pain and inconvenience, but you want to be able to have people at their most productive, most effective times during the day, so you maximize the valuable contribution of all of your team members. And we also have some other suggestions about ways to ameliorate the issues around language and accent.
So let's start by looking at some of the most important cultural challenges for global virtual teams, and we wanted to highlight these first two. The most important cultural challenge is around communication. The second, and the communication challenge was listed as 34% very important, 35% important, so nearly 70% of respondents found communication to be a very deep challenge for their virtual teams. In second place, the diversity and focus on group dynamics versus individual dynamics came in second, with 23% stating it was very important to focus on how those values differed and impacted the way virtual teams collaborated. Well, this has a lot to do with decision-making, which is a challenge that we've already talked about, and we'll look at in greater detail later on. But relationships were in third place here, and relationships have a lot to do with trust and the expectations that we deliver on being inherently cultural. Understanding those expectations and being able to build trust in culturally appropriate ways is another deep issue that virtual teams have today.
So I think there are a couple of interesting observations in this set of questions. I mean, first of all, it's interesting to note that time, while significant, is not an overwhelmingly significant challenge. Apparently, there is a global standard for time performance on virtual teams, so that less than 50% of the people see that as a major challenge to team effectiveness. That means delivering on time, managing projects on time, still consequential, but not as important as the challenges of communication, where you clearly see how the impact of losing face-to-face contact, and we'll talk about that more, has an impact on communication. How communication styles between direct and indirect communicators, and we'll spend some more time on that, have an impact on the productivity of the team. And then, of course, the issues of individualism versus group on a team. You know, we'll talk about how important it is for teams to establish rules for respectful interaction, rules to operate by. But basically, the notion of individual versus group, lots of us in Northern European or in U.S. cultures are pretty individualistic, happy to work on our own. Other people are much more team-focused, and it's and the different needs of how people work better individually or on a team have a pretty important role in how they interact on a virtual team.
Right. What we wanted to do is we got thousands of comments from individuals, and so we wanted to share a few of those. I'd encourage you to read what we did was we compiled them, we grouped them by topic and compiled them at the end of the report generally. I'd encourage you to read them because they give a real richness to the numbers. So what we wanted to do is here, this one comments on communication. People from direct communication cultures expect explicit instructions and to be informed of the true situation, even if it's negative. They may become frustrated when dealing with colleagues from indirect communication cultures who may struggle to share negative messages or complete information. Likewise, people from indirect communication cultures may find those from direct communication cultures rude or impatient. And you know, we all experience one or the other ends of that, I believe. And the important thing is to understand what the other is coming from or where the expectations are from the other group and try to bridge some of those differences.
I think it's worthwhile to comment on this comment that was written by a person responding to the survey, which was one of our clients or somebody who's working in the global arena. It's a very sophisticated cultural understanding. It shows that people understand there's differences in communication styles between cultures. And what we find in general these days is that everybody today understands how important culture is and how it can impact virtual team performance. What people are still looking for are the tactical answers to how to bridge these issues in a business situation. We get great observations, and now we need to find great answers.
Right. So here's some other great comments. This reflects on the group and individualistic cultures or individualism. In group-oriented cultures, individuals feel less responsible and are likely to be less proactive and take less ownership and responsibility for their actions or omissions. This is a comment from one of the participants, I just want to remind you. Another comment, too much individualism can lead to silos developing, creating barriers between teams. Different goals affect decision making. So again, you see here some of the challenges that each can bring. So we want to know who we're dealing with and what we can do to bridge that.
So we wanted to dive a little more deeply into this dimension of culture that we're referring to here as communication, and the results that we just saw around communication being the #1 cultural challenge are really not surprising, because this dimension is really a synthesis of so many different cultural values. Through our communication, we demonstrate our perspectives and our preferences around things like hierarchy, our perspective on time, our preferences around building relationships and trust, and a whole range of tendencies that impact the way that we work together in the virtual environment. So we wanted to just explain in a more visual way with some of these flag buttons, which are representative of very general national cultural norms, that in countries like Sweden or the US, you see those flag buttons on the direct side of the dimension. Communication is best or most successful when they are straightforward, when you're economic with your words, and when the information is really relevant. You know, asking this question, like how irrelevant is your communication, is often heard in these workspaces, because relevance is so important to transparency, to being honest, to being direct. But in countries like India and China, the value around communication is more deeply informed by the focus you see on harmony, by the avoidance of arguments, debate, embarrassment. Preserving that harmonious workplace is more important, so that informs the way people communicate, which is why you may see emails and comments that are indirect, more tactful. People consider emotions and feelings of others in the face of others. Avoiding loss of face is crucial to the indirect communication patterns that you see in countries in Asia and the Middle East, lots of places around the world. So we want to kind of present this picture as a way to start understanding how you can apply some of this awareness of difference around work styles, and to start bridging your own approach and adjusting to the environment that you find yourself in, and using this in an ongoing way, having an ongoing conversation with your colleagues to create rules around how you can communicate, when you'll communicate, and what is acceptable in terms of tone of voice in emails or what have you. But this information can be used and applied in so many ways. We wanted to make sure that we kind of dove a little deeper into this topic, given the challenging aspects that we've seen in the survey data. Now, we wanted to also look at in-person meetings. How often does your virtual team meet in person? And a third of folks told us that they never met their virtual teammates in person, which is a shame, because face-to-face communication, face-to-face meetings can really augment the productivity, the relationship, the trust that you have with your colleagues on your virtual team. But we were also very pleasantly surprised to see that 30% of respondents do meet at least once a year, which is a best practice that we advise our clients to try and achieve on an annual basis. Beyond that, we do have a little over a third that meet at least twice a year, which is excellent. But obviously, there are lots of reasons why we can't meet in person, and there's lots of reasons why folks never do it. Travel expenses are an obvious one. But we do find that the return on investment of having a face-to-face meeting at some point in time is critical, especially at the onset of some kind of virtual team project or what have you. Now, we wanted to look at technology because we found in the survey that 74% of respondents rarely or never use webcams, which is the best practice that we'll reiterate towards the end of our session today. But you can see here that through various communication technologies, whether it's email, voicemail, teleconference, webcams, and then also face-to-face, you get a variety of communication kind of dynamics that can inform the way you are productive or not very productive. But we also find that being careful about the technologies that you choose to use situationally can really improve the way that you communicate with your colleagues in the virtual workspace. So you can see here that, for example, with webcam, you've got more than just words. You can hear people's voice. You can infer certain things from their tone of voice, the way that they're phrasing their questions. You can get immediate feedback from individuals when you ask questions. You're on the phone, you have webcam, and you can really get a sense for the environment that they're in. You know, when you're working with people virtually on the phone and you can't see them, You don't know where they are. Perhaps they're in a cafe, perhaps they're walking down the street, maybe they're in a quiet office, perhaps they're at home. Having that contextual information can really tell you a lot about what that person is up against. What is their current mood, for example. So we find it to be quite important to understand how this affects your communication. Again, looking at the overall contribution of virtual teamwork to productivity, we see that a little more than a quarter of respondents rely at least half the time on their virtual work as it contributes to their overall productivity.
And clearly, again, you see the reinforcement of global work being virtual work and global teamwork being a critical part of virtual work. So really, this is where we spend our time. And the challenges we have here, the cultural challenges we have here, are things that we've got to learn how to bridge.
Now, if we looked at when we have no face-to-face contact, how does that impact our productivity on virtual teams? So for those 34% that never meet their virtual teammates, for example, reading those nonverbal cues is much more challenging. Once you've had a chance to meet someone, you've seen a picture of them, for example, you've had a webcam conversation, these challenges start to diminish. But when you have no face-to-face contact whatsoever, those nonverbal cues are really, lacking. They really create a barrier to being effective. And beyond that, the building of a relationship doesn't really take off as quickly as it would should you have some kind of face-to-face contact. So we wanted to kind of understand that without that, how does that impact your productivity with your virtual teammates?
So in addition to the obvious here, we also see that it has a significant impact on establishing trust. I mean, we'll talk more about trust and the importance of trust, but clearly trust is the glue of all teams. And teammates have to be able to trust each other. And misunderstandings attrit trust more than anything else. And especially when they are because of cultural areas where people misinterpret behavior, and that misinterpretation leads to a loss of trust, which then leads to a loss of productivity and makes work less fun as well as less productive. So the notion of, kind of the cascading effect of not having verbal cues from seeing each other, not being able to build a relationship as effectively, having misunderstandings, the loss of trust, you can see how that could create a spiral, which is one of the reasons why we're going to later be suggesting the importance of creating rules of respectful interaction that we'll talk about more.
And when you see here that 59% say that reading not being able to read nonverbal cues as being a much greater challenge, and far above the other building relationships even, and understanding the full context of the message, it's important to remember that you want to try to create some kind of way that people can see some of those nonverbal cues, which is why we also talk about using a webcam, or when people do email messages, sometimes we're finding that one of the reasons for a greater use of emoticons is so that people can understand really what's the intention under the message.
We'd like to go ahead and launch a poll right now to get a sense for your feelings on what makes a good virtual teammate. So assuming competence, assuming that your virtual teammates are competent technically in whatever role that they play, what makes a virtual teammate a good one? Please go ahead and respond. We've got 5 choices here, and then we'd like to kind of digest the way that you responded before moving onward. about 70% so far have voted. We'll give you guys another 10 seconds to cast a vote here. All right, we're at about 86% voted. Let's go ahead and close this poll and share the results. We can see here that 39% of you, the majority here, not the majority, but the largest votes, went to being proactively engaged, being involved in the conversation, being engaged and responsive perhaps is what makes a good virtual team. And beyond that, 35% said that being collaborative is important in being a good virtual teammate. And then the third one at 15% is shares information. Now this is interesting because we want to actually take a look now at how this compares to the results that we found in the survey. And we did ask this question. And what we found is that the top characteristic of a good virtual teammate was someone who shares information at 20%. Around 15% of you told us that this was important. Beyond that, the 3,000 respondents said that being collaborative was the next most important characteristic, followed by being proactively engaged. So actually, these three are more or less the same as what you all have just told us defines a good virtual teammate. But I think we should also make note that these characteristics are likely to be kind of connected to whatever cultural values the respondents themselves have. We talk about social skills here being only 10%, or 10% of respondents found this to be an important characteristic. But I think the preference around building relationships, whether it's interpersonal or more transactional, has a lot to do with how anyone would vote on this being
right. And
important.
Sean, I'm sure that all the Brazilians in the survey voted that having good social skills is really important.
Right, exactly.
And and I'm also reminded of the German client who was having trouble with his virtual with his U.S. members on his virtual team. They're saying to us that they're always offering to help me. Are they thinking that I'm incompetent? I can do my job and I'll do it at my own pace, and I'll get it done on time. Why are they always offering to be helpful? So you can see how some of these answers and what are good teammate behaviors are so culturally based. So the idea of shares information in an open information sharing society where information is power, people who share power, and looking at 42% of these people who responded to the survey being from the U.S., it's not surprising that sharing information would be so important.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going back to some of the general challenges that individuals face on virtual teams, this is again consistent with the past two surveys that we conducted. We earlier mentioned here at the bottom that 65% found cultural differences to be somewhat challenging, or very challenging, which we've already focused on. But time zones, the amount of time required to make decisions, and understanding accents persist in being severely challenging components of virtual teaming. Now, if we look at the severity of virtual team challenges compared to co-located teams, what respondents told us is that colleagues who do not participate on virtual teams is severely challenging compared to their co-located teams. And this idea of participation, this idea of, what is the kind of characteristic of a meeting, for example, a collaborative engagement with a virtual team versus a co-located team, it seems like people perhaps need to have a deeper understanding of how, of the expectations of participation based on any number of things. Hierarchy, who is involved, who's present at a meeting, who's listening, who's invited to a meeting, for example. Understanding these different kind of components of a virtual interaction can perhaps lead to greater understanding around why certain people do not participate. But nonetheless, this was either somewhat challenging, or very challenging in the virtual environment compared to those teams that were co-located or In other words, teams that kind of sat in the same office or in the same space. There's a lot of information here, so we want to just kind of let you digest some of this. Pace of decision-making is there once again. Process of decision-making is the third most challenging item here.
You know, it's so important to keep in mind that people don't participate, don't appear to participate, often because they're not comfortable with the language. They don't feel that the process is inclusive and allows them to participate, or they don't think that they're supposed to participate because in certain cultures, not everyone is empowered to participate in a discussion. That also it impacts the pace and kind of decision making. So culture is kind of really underneath all these challenges.
A slightly different view at a similar question, just general differences between virtual teams and face-to-face teams. What's more challenging? What's less challenging? Is there no difference between some of these activities? And making decisions tops out this list as being more challenging, bar none, on virtual teams. Beyond that, managing conflict. How do you manage conflict in a virtual environment? Expressing opinions, delivering quality output, and finally, generating innovative ideas. Around 45% of those who responded told us that it was no different. So this idea of tapping into resources around the world, regardless of geography, to really come up with creative business solutions seems to be one of the benefits of virtual teaming, and continues to be one of the main reasons why we need them as businesses to thrive. This is a new question that we asked this year. Are you a leader of any virtual teams? And 38% told us outright that yes, they are leaders. But 62% said that they were not. And what we know from our own experience providing training on this topic is that virtual teaming is a wonderful developmental arena for future leaders because of the importance that virtual teaming is to our world, and the increasing importance and the increasingly important role it plays as we move forward is going to be very crucial for individuals to learn how to lead people without seeing them, without meeting them, through virtual technologies that facilitate this kind of work.
So we're doing a great deal of work these days on the whole subject of leadership. You know, as the world becomes more global, companies and organizations need leaders who can be effective globally, and the notion of leadership as kind of superseding even the notion of management, because you may manage process, but you lead thought, and there's great focus on leadership. And the simple fact is, as we say, that if global work is virtual work, global leadership is virtual leadership, and a great training ground, as Sean points out, for virtual leadership is serving on a virtual team. It's a really important aspect.
So here we're back to some of the verbatim comments that that we asked people to give. And this one was the top 2 challenges you face in leading your virtual team. Engaging all of the team members and gaining their opinion, getting their commitment to the final decision or agreement, and getting people to pay attention. We know that getting people to pay attention is always a big deal, whether you're leading the team or whether you're just on the team yourself. Another one is it's difficult at times to get members to complete tasks, as I have no leverage or direct management. Buy-in, getting all team to see the bigger picture and overall goal, and that's really tough. And one more that was really representative was fostering a collaborative team, engaging those who work remotely, not being able to have coffee machine conversations with remote-based individuals. And one of the things that we know is that one of the toughest types of teams to lead is one where there are some co-located members and some who are virtual or in satellite offices, because you have the issue of the co-located members being able to see quite a bit of body language, having that extra element of relationship building, and also the danger or the risk of side conversations. So there are many challenges as one leads a virtual team.
And our last bit of insight into the key findings that we want to present today is another new question that we asked. Do you perceive gender-based differences in team participation? And what we're looking for here, what we intended to find out here, is whether or not people sensed a different style of work or a different approach to work, not asking whether or not it was good or bad, but just asking if there was a difference. And we were surprised to see that only 14% said that, yes, there were differences.
So we think that this was a problem with the question, because based on all of the anecdotal data that we have and common sense, that there are gender-based differences in team interaction, participation. We think that people may have misread it or read it to be gender-biased incidents that happen, or challenges because people are of a different gender. So this is a question that we're going to be wanting to investigate more and more fully.
All right, we've got about 12 minutes, 11 minutes left until we finish. So let's go ahead and take a look at the implications of this information, some of the best practices for effective virtual teaming. And one of the illuminating insights that we gathered here is that only 21% of those who responded said that they've ever had training or a learning experience that was in support of their developing skills to be effective in the virtual environment. We feel that this is an anomaly given the amount of training that is available around the world for lots of job-centered, job-related activities, whether it's using technology, avoiding discrimination, what have you. But this very fact that we've reiterated many times already today, that working virtually is really not intuitive to the natural kind of human way of relating to people and seeing people and using those visual stimuli to support any kind of interaction.
So since people need to learn a non-intuitive behavior, it seems interesting that so few people actually get training around this very learnable process of being more effective in working on virtual teams. And I'm sure that's something that will be evolving as we go along here.
So a key best practice here, we're repeating this graph once again, but we really believe that virtual teams as global teams, cross-cultural, multicultural teams need to understand how to leverage that inherent diversity, and the benefits are obvious, but the challenge here is finding a way to share a common purpose, to be collaborative despite cultural differences. So what we wanted to project here was an image from our Team Place tool, and many of you on the call today have access to the Culture Wizard learning platform, which contains this tool. So we want to encourage you all to investigate how you can integrate a conversation that is based on a team profile that you can create very easily by logging in and inviting individuals to complete the Culture Calculator self-assessment. It's 40 questions, and in the end it aggregates those individuals into a single team profile that you can use to really deeply consider individuals on your team, the cultural differences that exist between communication styles, perspectives on hierarchy and relationship building, what have you, so that you can then create some structure around that unique cultural composition and develop a team culture that works for your team, that you can all rely on, a living and breathing document that evolves as your team evolves, as people are added to the team or leave the team, you can revisit this information. It's so important to develop that understanding and to agree upon how you can relate to one another. We asked this question of the survey respondents and surprisingly found that 31% actually are working on this or already have guidelines for respectful interaction or for effective interaction, however you want to put it. But 69% of individuals do not have this or have not done this. So we found it very important to focus on how this activity should become a part of your team interactions, whether you have regular meetings where you can include a few minutes to talk about this, or at the onset of a new project with a new virtual team, starting out with an hour or two to discuss the implications of your team profile and use that as a way to develop some kind of team culture.
Yeah, I think that if there's any piece of counsel and advice from our perspective that we would share, it's how important it is to create structures and rules and guidelines for how the team is going to operate. I mean, we all recognize that coming from different cultures, we have different expectations of how teams work. We have different expectations of how decisions are made. We have different expectations of how we demonstrate engagement and how we become active, responsive team members, when we should speak, whether we should disagree, how we're going to make decisions. Our expectations are all different. So we come together on a team, and no wonder there are some challenges on how that team operates. So developing some guidelines for how we're going to operate is easy to do, and it makes the process so much smoother to operate with and enables you to create then a team culture. So strongly recommend developing guidelines. And that's a great area for improvement of all of the virtual teams.
So Mike is going to wrap up our session, and then we'll get into question and answer, but we do want to quickly review our revised list of best practices.
Great. So, we have 10 best practices we put up here for effective virtual teams. So what we think is that, one is that you should create agendas for each team meeting, distribute the agendas in advance, enable people to prepare for meetings, and develop a summary following it. And that summary helps overcome some of the challenges of language understanding, because people may have missed something and not wanted to ask for definitions. So having an agenda and a summary, really important. In advance of meetings, we think that you should email material, because sometimes people don't have the technology to keep up to a PowerPoint presentation, because many of these global participants will take a call from home where they may not have high-speed technology. So I think it's really important to send out as much information in advance that people can download. Move the time zones around so that not the same people don't suffer all the time with having to get up in the middle of the night or stay up late or get up early, whatever the case is. We've mentioned often about the importance of webcams and how they humanize the process by seeing the face and the person and their environment, and make trust easier to establish and relationships easier to establish. Of course, we just talked about developing the guidelines for effective interactions. Remember that people come to these virtual teams with different expectations and different backgrounds and different rules that they've been taught. So let's establish rules for our teams. We then talk about actively, consciously working to reinforce trust. Again, if trust is the glue and trust is built incrementally and deteriorates incrementally, you've got to make sure that you create behaviors that reinforce trust and avoid those that might challenge trust. And there is, again, for those of, and most of you are Culture Wizard users, you have access to the trust audit on the virtual Teams tool online. So it's a really great, easy, quick, fun resource to let yourself know how well you're doing and where your team needs to improve on building trust. The importance of focusing on relationships can't be most of the world is high on relationships. And that's how you build trust, that's how you build effective communications, and that's how you build collaboration. The other important thing is to make sure that you get participation from people in meetings. And everybody wants to participate. Help them be participative by inviting comments, soliciting insights. And find ways of anticipating that you're going to have some language difficulties. Everybody's going to be able to speak clearly, so find ways that you can make sure that people can ask each other questions, can make sure that we get a clear meaning of what's being intended as well as what's being said. And again, some situations need to be taken offline, and I would certainly think that good meetings also have some bilateral output where if there is a question, rather than have a conflict on the phone, on a team meeting, you can take a conversation offline, and good leadership would do that as well. So those are our best practice recommendations, and we'll continue.
And by the way, we'll have all of these best practices listed and in more detail, actually, in the full report that you'll be receiving via email early next week. I'd like to actually skip ahead to our questions section here because we've only got a few minutes left, and we'd like to address a couple of those. So Joshua, our producer, will be reading out a few, and the three of us here will do our best to respond.
Okay, thanks, Sean. One of the questions we received was, did the survey differentiate virtual teams between project teams with a finite term versus teams that might sustain or be long-term? And do you have any tips for the differences between those, the different dynamics?
We
short-term.
Right. We did not differentiate, and it's a good point. Clearly, if it's an ongoing team, you have a chance to get to know each other better over a long period of time. But what we found was that a lot of the issues are the same. So that's why we were really focusing on what are the issues that people are discovering as really challenging to them. In any case, I think we would all agree that developing a relationship is really key. Obviously, if it's a project team and it's short term and you have deliverables, I would suggest making sure that that relationship building happens right away. Find out a little bit about your team members and things that they like or dislike, just to get to know them a little bit.
And I would also add that all of this insight, the key findings that we've just presented, presents a sort of argument that you, as a member of a new project team that you know is only going to last for several months, maybe maximum of 6 months, could make an argument that we need to have a team kickoff that is face-to-face, for example. Let's bring everyone together. There's budget here. We may not all agree that we want to spend it on this, but according to this data, the return on that investment will likely be greater than not having it. So using this insight to kind of encourage certain activities that may be outside the normal realm of what you would do on virtual project teams could be a good way to build that relationship and trust.
Right, and if that's impossible, if a telepresence or a webcam situation is impossible because of the nature of your business, then it would be, I think, advisable to try to think creatively about other ways that you can start to get to know each other.
Great.
Thanks. Okay, another question. If you could give a couple tips for dealing with people being distracted on virtual, I suppose, conference calls in particular. Are there any tips you guys have for addressing that?
Well, the best way is to have a webcam. I mean, there's just, if they're on in front of you, it's just as good as being sitting across the desk from somebody. Other than that,
And making sure that people have to stay engaged because you call engaging people, so soliciting impressions and opinions and thoughts from members, make sure that people stay focused. So if there's a camera on you and you know you're going to be asked a question, it's hard to take a nap.
Exactly, and I think some of the communication tactics that we advise our clients to encourage, such as verifying understanding. Could you restate what I've just said so I can confirm that you understand? Making sure people are attentive by asking open-ended questions and avoiding the trap that a lot of us fall into by asking questions that require a yes or a no, which is generally a no-no for lots of cultures that always want to say yes, even if the true feeling inside is no. So really finding ways to ask questions, phrasing questions in the best way to get the attention and the responses that you need.
And I would say, too, to take a step back, if you're the leader and you have a constant problem with that, maybe the meetings are too long. Maybe the topics don't need to be discussed in the full team grouping. If you're a participant and you find that that's the case, maybe it's a good suggestion to advise the leader that they're a little bit long. And it's easy to get distracted.
Great.
Do you have any more questions, Josh?
A couple of questions about that. I think people were surprised by the results of some aspects of the survey. Some people, one aspect related to time, people downplaying the importance of fluid versus controlled time, and another person wondering about the downplaying of the lack of nonverbal communication. And in both cases, I think they're sort of suggesting, does this have something to do with the demographics of our respondents? For example, a lot of them being from the U.S. Do you think that's the case, or does it have to do with some other dynamics going on there?
I think that the dynamic with time is that there is a growing universalism in time, and even in very low time cultures, meetings tend to start pretty much on time, especially when there are people from foreign cultures. Now, that's a very broad generalization, and there are exceptions to that, of course, but an expectation of a meeting, especially a virtual meeting, starting on time and running through a defined time period is pretty much the way the entire world operates. Delivering projects on time is a different story, and that is so I think that still remains an issue. But the timeliness of the meeting themselves, and I have a feeling that way that question was interpreted, is why people, only half the folks thought that time was a big concern in this survey. I think that the issue of lack of face-to-face was always stressed in all the answers, unless I'm misinterpreting something. I think we have time for one more question, Josh.
Okay, great. This is, again, related to time. This is someone pointing out that they've found that 7 a.m. is an ideal time to have conference calls for worldwide coverage. I'm not sure where 7 a.m. that is, if that's Eastern time or something like that. But do you suggest having a set time, or do you suggest making some team members take the call in the middle of the night, or switching who it is that needs to take that call, et cetera? Do you have some tips on that?
Look, it depends a great deal on where the majority of the people are that are in the meeting. 7 a.m., if we're dealing with 7 a.m. Eastern time, that is a pretty good time to have a meeting, because it gets Europe in the day and it gets Asia at the end of the day. So that is a pretty good time. But I think moving the times around is also a good idea. Remember, 7 a.m. is 4 a.m. on the West Coast. So it's, the idea of moving times around to acknowledge that you're spreading the impact, that you're kind of being collegial with everybody, and letting everybody feel a little bit of the pain is probably a fair and sets a good tone for your team.
And I think asking people on the team how they'd like to handle it is also another way of acknowledging that the time is a big issue. And we've had teams, project teams, as large as a dozen, 15, where we've told people, how do you want to do it? So if you're going to be working together, that's another alternative way of trying to figure it out, as well as alternating times, as well as choosing a specific time zone that impacts people what somebody considers minimally.
All right, so we're about 7 minutes past. I want to thank everyone for staying on to listen. I hope that this discussion and the revealing of information from our survey has been insightful. We all want to thank you once again for being here and remind you that for those who have access to Culture Wizard, there are a wealth of resources that further expound upon some of these topics, the Virtual Teams tool being one of them. Within that tool, we have the trust audit that you can use to start a conversation around how you can do a better job at building trust on your virtual teams. But there's a lot of information and learning resources that you can use to continue on with this topic. If you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and send me an email at this address that you've got now. And look for an email from us at the beginning of next week with a link to view a recording of this session if you want to share that with anyone that couldn't attend today, in addition to the actual full report itself, which we're sure will be valuable as you move forward in your virtual teamwork. So thanks to Josh for producing, and
thank you all very much.
Everyone else. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.